Now for today's program. Please note that we invited a few people to join us live and in the background, so the laughter you hear today is definitely not a laugh track. And while most of today's jokes will be newly shared with our Moment audience, there may be a few that you heard last time when our guest joined us in 2021. They are just too good not to repeat. And now it is my pleasure to introduce William Novak. Bill is co-editor with Moshe Waldoks of the Big Book of Jewish Humor, which was first published in 1981 and is still in print today. Bill has a special connection to Moment magazine, as he was an editor and writer for Moment during our first 3 years, beginning in 1975. A well-known ghostwriter, he has co-authored, among other works, the memoirs of Lee Iacocca, Tip O'Neill, Oliver North, Nancy Reagan, Tim Russert, Magic Johnson, and Natan Sharansky. His latest book is Die Laughing, Killer Jokes for Newly Old Folks. Please welcome William Novak.
We've done this before, as Suzanne told you, and I enjoyed it so much and was delighted to be invited back. And what a brilliant idea. I wish it were mine to schedule an hour of jokes, less than an hour, but a session of jokes on this of all days. I wish I'd thought of it, Suzanne. I'm glad you did. You know about the tiny amount of laughing you will hear. And I thought I would, because I know at least a couple of people personally who were not brought up Jewish and are not Jewish, in fact, and who may not get a couple of jokes unless I translate them, and nobody wants to have a joke explained at the time. I'm going to quickly tell you a few words I'm going to use and what they mean. Most of you, many of you at least, will know these words. Hocking is nagging. Hocking is nagging. A shadchan is a matchmaker. Nachas is the kind of joy you get from family, and especially from your children, if they're behaving and doing good things. Kvetch, you probably know, is to complain. Daven is the act of prayer, but it also means to lead a service. And in one of the jokes, daven will mean leading the service. Musaf is a service, an afternoon service on holidays, Jewish holidays, and the Sabbath. Tefillin, I can't begin to explain, but it involves a box on the head of males, usually, and on the arms, but don't worry about it. A machzor, which I will probably explain, is the high holiday prayer book. And I know I'm doing these too fast to remember, and bima is the stage, the elevated area where the leaders of the service are likely to be standing. Let's start. The great Talmudic sage known as Rabbah used to begin every lecture with a joke. And because of his reputation, and because this practice is mentioned in the Talmud, I think we can assume that starting with a joke was thought to be a good idea. But what should you do when your presentation is about jokes and consists of nothing but jokes? Then do you begin with a joke? Oddly enough, nobody asked this question, so I did. Hillel, of course, said yes, and Shammai, of course, said no. So I did the smart thing. I asked my wife, and she said, of course you should start with a joke. So I will. At their 40th high school reunion, Robert runs into David, his old classmate. You look amazing, he says. It's as if you haven't aged at all. Thanks, says David. I get that a lot. It seems to run in our family. Did your father have a long life? Who says he died? He's 82. He still runs marathons. Unbelievable. How about your grandfather? Did he live a long time? Who says he died? You mean to tell me? Yes, Zeta is still with us. Every morning at dawn, he walks 2 miles to shul, although sometimes he gets a ride back. Oh, and how about this? Next week, he's getting married again. Wait a minute. He's getting married again? How old is this man? He's 103. Why would a man that old want to get married? Well, says David, I'm not sure he wants to, but his parents keep hocking him. Remember, jokes When I was young and when most of you were young, comedians like Myron Cohen and countless others told jokes. Old-fashioned jokes with a structure. A man goes into a bar, or a priest, a minister, and a rabbi are having lunch together. Now, nobody in public tells jokes in that sense. It's all routines, although some of these routines are wonderful. For decades now, jokes have been slowly disappearing from our culture. And this started happening long before the plague of political correctness. One reason I like telling jokes is to do my part to help preserve this vital element of American humor, and specifically Jewish humor. Uh-oh, it's time for another joke. Okay. Mrs. Rosen, who has just moved into a new apartment, invites her adult grandson for dinner. You can park on the street, she says on the phone. Go to the front door, press 9J with your elbow, and I'll buzz you in. Take the elevator up to 9, turn right, press the doorbell with your elbow. How's 6:30? He says, 6:30 is fine, but what's all this about my elbow? Pressing buttons with my elbow. What, she says? You're coming empty-handed? My understanding of this joke has changed over the years. Not that long ago, I thought the grandmother was acting entitled, that the joke was at her expense. I now feel, probably because I myself am a grandparent, that by virtue of her age, if nothing else, she actually is entitled, in the older sense of the word. That is, she is justified in expecting a gift or two. Now, I know some people were hoping to hear some of the best known Jewish jokes, so I've decided to go halfway, to meet you halfway. I'm going to give you the punchlines of 10 classic Jewish jokes that I hope will ring a bell. And because I won't be telling these jokes today, at least you'll know how they end. If they don't ring a bell, I know the perfect place to find these and many other Jewish jokes. Feel free, if you're with us, feel free to keep count of how many of the 10 you actually know. And my friend Jerry is here. I bet he knows 11 or 12 of the 10. First punchline, comfortable, I make a living. Second punchline, if you had a bad week, should I suffer? Third punchline, he had a hat. My friend Moshe Waldox can stretch that joke to 10 or 15 minutes. Punchline number 4, you know what, says the rabbi? You're right too. Number 5, over there? Oh, that's the shul I wouldn't set foot in. Number 6, you don't have to whisper, says the shadchan. She's deaf too. 7th punchline, oy, was I thirsty. Number 8, does that mean you're not coming? Number 9, funny, you don't look Jewish. And number 10, one of my favorites, why, just look at how they putchki up a baked apple. Don't worry, from here on in, I will tell the entire joke. Here's an older and fairly well-known joke. On a train in Tsarist Russia, a Jew is eating a whitefish wrapped in paper. A uniformed officer sitting across the aisle begins to taunt him with various anti-Semitic comments. Finally, he says, "Hey, what makes you Jews so smart?" "All right," replies the Jew, "I'm going to tell you. It's because we eat the head of the whitefish." "Well, if that's the secret," says the officer, "then I can be as smart as you are." "Well, that's right," says the Jew. "And in fact, I happen to have an extra whitefish head with me, and you can have it for 5 kopecks. The officer pays for the fish head and eats it. An hour later, the train stops at a station for 20 minutes. The officer leaves the train briefly and comes back before it takes off again. "Listen, Jew," he says, "you sold me that whitefish head for 5 kopecks, but I just saw a man selling an entire whitefish for 5 kopecks. "You see," says the Jew, "you're getting smarter already." Like all Jewish texts, Jewish jokes are rich with commentary. You may be aware that Freud wrote a whole book of about classic Jewish jokes. Jokes and Their Relation to the Unconscious was published in 1905. And among other things, Freud made the point that now seems obvious, but it wasn't back then, that although Jewish humor is often self-critical, it's entirely different than the kinds of jokes that might be told by anti-Semites. And more than that, more than the fact that Jewish jokes have commentary, Jewish jokes are themselves commentaries, not on other texts, but on almost anything else, and almost everything else, including certain professions, any and all authority figures, families, values, religion, human nature, and especially when it comes to examples of human weakness and hypocrisy. In other words, these jokes are commentaries on life itself. A 3-minute history. When did Jewish humor start? Some people say it began in the Torah. But is the Torah funny? Come on now. Right away, there's a murder. And why did Cain kill Abel? Yesh omrim. There are those who say that the real reason Cain killed his brother in the early chapters of Genesis was because Abel insisted on telling him a joke he'd heard 100 times already. And although there is certainly nothing funny about the biblical Isaac, who famously had to endure one especially terrible, horrible, no good, very bad day, Torah makes clear that there was some laughter around the news of his birth to elderly parents, which is why he was named Yitzchak. Literally, he will laugh. As his mother, Sarah, put it, God has made me laugh, so all who hear about this will laugh with me. Which brings me to a fundamental truth that I had never realized until I was preparing for this talk. Of our 3 biblical patriarchs, one of them is named for laughter. After the Torah, we have the Talmud. Is the Talmud funny? Well, here and there you may find vaguely funny parts, but you have to look pretty hard. I looked pretty hard, and I learned about a fellow named Plimo, who asked if a baby boy is born with 2 heads, when he comes of age, on which head should he place his tefillin? The leading rabbi of the 2nd century was not amused. You can leave right now, he said, or you can be excommunicated. In other words, by asking this question, you're making a mockery of everything we do here. But the joke was on him. Him was Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi, because not long after this, a man came to the academy saying that his newborn son had 2 heads, which raised the question of how much should be given to the priest for redemption. You don't have to understand the question, but the answer was twice the usual amount. But I see that I've already gone too long without a joke. I have a friend named Joel here in Newton, Massachusetts. Some of you know him, who specializes in jokes about conversion. So I'm sure he knows this one. A Jew converts and studies to become a priest. He clearly has some talent, and when the time comes, he celebrates his first Mass in front of a select audience that includes a number of high-ranking priests. At the end of the new priest's sermon, the cardinal goes up to congratulate him. Father Markowitz, he said, that was wonderful. You were clearly meant to be a priest. Just one little thing, though. Next time, maybe it's best not to begin your sermon with, my fellow Goyim. And now back to our brief history of Jewish humor. So while you can find a tiny bit of humor in the Torah and a little in the Talmud, the first golden age of Jewish humor was in Eastern Europe during the 19th century. The second was in North America during the 20th century. The third, I believe, is Israel right now in the 21st century, but humor doesn't translate very well, so we'll stick with the first 2 today. The 19th century gave rise to what we usually call traditional Jewish humor, and like all joke-based humor, it comes to us anonymously. But wait, well before the 19th century, we had the earliest versions of the wise men of Chelm that the stories many of us grew up in. Chelm, as you probably know, is an imaginary town of fools that also shows up under various names in other European folklores. And yes, there is a real city of Chelm in Poland, not far from Lublin, but the real Chelm was actually known for its scholars. Amazingly, the first Yiddish publication of Chelm-like stories appeared in 1597. and it described not Chelm, but a German town called Schildberg. Over the years, these stories were repeated and added to and became known as Chelm stories, and they continue to be popular, especially with young children. In our family, we joke about Chelm all the time, and I've always wanted to find a sweatshirt that reads Chelm State College. The last time I mentioned that in a Jewish humor talk, the rabbi of the host congregation surprised me, and look what arrived in the mail. So thank you, Aviva. The back I'm not so sure about, but I guess I should show you the back.
I mean, all I got was this lousy pair of pants.
Two residents of Chelm went out for a walk when suddenly it began to rain. "No," says the first man, "open your umbrella." "It's no use, won't help," says his friend. "My umbrella is full of holes." "Full of holes? Then why did you bring it?" He says, "I didn't think it would rain." A jokester in Chelm once thought up a riddle that nobody could solve. What's purple, hangs on the wall, and whistles? When everyone gave up, he proudly announced the answer. "It's a herring." "A herring? But a herring isn't purple," somebody called out. "This herring was painted purple." Another said, "And a herring doesn't hang on a wall." He said, "Aha, but this herring was nailed to a wall." "And a herring doesn't whistle," said a third person, to which the jokester replied, "No, so it doesn't whistle." And here's a Chelm story I never heard as a child and whose authenticity I can't vouch for, but I do love it. One day, the residents of Chelm decided to deal with the high price of beer by making their own. After months of trying different recipes, they finally choose what they think is the very best one. They make a small batch of their beer and proudly send it off to Warsaw for certification. 2 weeks later comes a telegram. We regret to inform you that your horse has diabetes." Even outside of Chelm, Jewish humor loves logic jokes. A Jew brought a package to the post office where the clerk weighed it and said, "It's too heavy. You need to put on more stamps." "And if I put on more stamps," said the man, "that'll make it lighter?" Which is similar to, and this is your cue, Suzanne, "Sam, close the window, it's cold outside." "And if I close the window," said Sam, "will it be warm outside?" Not too long ago, Moment magazine, you see it in the corner, in the bottom left, published the best book ever of Jewish cartoons. May also be the only book ever of Jewish cartoons, but I found plenty to laugh about. I will, for the people who in my house and elsewhere who may not be seeing it clearly or at all, the first cartoon, which I chose because it's, I think, the most popular Jewish cartoon of the past couple of decades. A chassid in what might be a train station is on his cell phone and he's saying, "Remember, if you need anything, I'm available 24/6. Next one, please. Obviously, we see Abraham with a knife. Isaac is laid out in front of him on an altar. And Abraham says, "Must I sacrifice family for career?" I thought that was pretty good. We see in the next one a man who must be Moses approaching a Egyptian king, a pharaoh, and he's saying, "Have your people let my people go." We see Moses holding the tablets, and he's saying, this is really wonderful. He's saying, "Thou shalt not create graven images, Ira. Thou shalt not take the Lord's name in vain." Still looking at you, Ira. "Thou shalt keep holy the Sabbath." You getting this, Ira? We see on the left part of the picture the gifts of the Magi, I guess, the newborn baby and a king, and they're offering him gifts. And there's a little Jewish family. A man is in a yarmulke is saying to a little boy, "We got you a dreidel." This one is complicated, a lot of words. It's by Roz Chast. It's called the All Candy Seder. It's a Seder plate. I'll start in the top left and I'll go clockwise. I'll take off my glasses so I can read her small print. Candy breath mint in one of the dishes stands for the importance of human relationships. The next one, small wad of cotton candy, stands for the sweetness yet intangibility of life. The third dish, coffee candy, stands for the need to be alert. The fourth, toasted marshmallow, stands for how one gets burned by experience, yet actually benefits from it as well. The fifth one, sour lemon drop, stands for life's disappointments. And the last one, the second last one, chocolate from a box with God knows what inside, stands for life's utter unpredictability. And finally, the last of the Seder dishes on the Seder plate, multi-layered, all-day jawbreaker, stands for the complexity of life. That's Roz Chast, All Candy Seder. I thought it was funny. Next one, another Roz Chast. You see a young man at a table outside, and there are pamphlets on the table and a big sign, Jews for Jesus, and also for pissing off one's parents, even if they weren't religious, in a way that Hare Krishnas can't even begin to imagine. The good Reaper is here with his mighty scythe. A man opens the door. There's a lot of people inside. And he says, I do hope you're here for the circumcision. And the last, or maybe it's the second last one, we're at a funeral. The casket is here. There's some mourners. And off to the side, a man is telling a woman, I had that, only worse. Oh, yes. And the last one, there's a tombstone and it says, it killed him to call. With a picture on it of a cell phone flying up to heaven. Thank you. These are, I'll just say, these are, again, all available in a book that I'm sure Suzanne will tell you how to get, and I recommend it. Have I Got a Cartoon for You? The Moment Magazine book of Jewish cartoons. Anyway, traditional Jewish humor likes to joke about rabbis and cantors, as you would expect, but also shadchans, matchmakers, and schnorrers, and we'll get to them in a minute. A shadchan approaches a yeshiva student and says, I have a great girl for you. Well, I'm not really interested, says the young man. She's extremely beautiful, says the shadchan. All right, says the student, tell me more. Well, she comes from a great family, and they're fairly wealthy, too. She sounds wonderful, says the young man, but I'm wondering, why would a girl like that want to marry someone like me? She'd have to be crazy. Well, says the shadchan, nobody's perfect. Yeah, you don't hear a lot of matchmaking jokes these days, but a few years ago when Moshe Waldox and I were on a syndicated radio show to talk about the 25th anniversary of the Big Book of Jewish Humor, and you want to make sure you have that newer edition, the 25th anniversary, because it includes about 100 more jokes. A woman from South Carolina, of all places, called in with this joke, which neither of us had ever heard before, and it's pretty wonderful in my opinion. An Orthodox family is unhappy that their somewhat rebellious, entitled 28-year-old son still isn't married, so they bring in a shadchan. As you'd expect, the shadchan asks the young man a number of questions about himself and the kind of woman he might want to meet. And the son responds just as you would expect. She should be attractive, well-educated, spirited, intelligent, good sense of humor, and so on. 3 weeks later, the shadchan returns and meets with the boy and his family. He tells them about Rivka, who is beautiful, well-educated, great family, eager to have children, meets all the other requirements that the young man and his parents have mentioned. And the parents, at least in their minds, are already planning the wedding, but their son seems hesitant. Is something wrong, says the shadchan. Well, says the young man, I'm sorry, I meant to ask you, this girl, is she good in bed? The parents are shocked, but if the shadchan is phased, he doesn't show it. Actually, he replies, that's a tough one. Some say yes, some say no. What I love about this joke is that it takes a well-known character from traditional Jewish humor and inserts him unexpectedly into our own era. Shadchan jokes are a mainstay of older Jewish humor and important enough to merit several mentions in Freud's book. Another character from 19th century Jewish humor is the schnorrer, a word usually translated as beggar, which is literally true. I prefer Moshe's definition, a poor Jew with middle-class values. The schnorrer knows that in Judaism, giving to the poor isn't a choice, it isn't an option, it's a commandment, it's a duty. So schnorrers are known for their chutzpah, which sometimes gets a little out of hand. As Ruth Weiss wrote, because they are endorsed by a religion that demands high levels of giving, schnorrers have generated a brand of comic insolence by demanding from their benefactors not only generosity, but gratitude. The fact that there are also jokes that mock the schnorrer tells us that he enjoyed a certain status, because Jewish humor never makes fun of the truly weak or disadvantaged. A schnorrer is going door to door asking for help because his house was destroyed in a fire. At one house, somebody asks, well, do you have a letter from your rabbi certifying that your story is true? Boy, he replies, that too was destroyed in the fire. I like this next one because it embodies the essence of the schnorrer. A schnorrer comes to see a potential benefactor who is so moved by the visitor's sad story that he hands him a wad of cash. An hour later, the donor walks into a restaurant and he's astonished to see the schnorrer feasting on bagels and lox. What chutzpah, says the donor. Is this why I gave you money? So you could go out and eat bagels and lox? No, wait just a minute, replied the schnorrer. When I had no money, I couldn't afford to eat bagels and lox. Now, with God's help and yours, I can finally afford this nice meal, and you come along and say I shouldn't eat bagels and lox. So tell me, exactly when am I supposed to eat bagels and lox? I love this joke even more these days because our youngest son, who lives in Brooklyn, has for several years been helping out a homeless man, and inspired by this joke, from time to time he takes him out for bagels and lox. Jewish humor has always had a well-developed dark side for perfectly understandable reasons that seem especially relevant these days. In a contemporary joke, Steve and Amy go to see the original production of Hamilton. The play was in its third month, and tickets were impossible to find, but somehow they got a pair in the fifth row. Just before the play began, Amy noticed an empty seat in the row behind them, and this bothered her. When an intermission arrived and that seat was still unoccupied, she turned to the woman beside that seat and said, "Forgive me, I can't help but notice that the seat next to yours is empty." "Oh," the woman said, "that seat was for my late husband." Amy expressed her condolences and said, "It's none of my business, but don't you have a friend or a family member who wanted to see the play?" "I tried," said the woman, "I really tried, but they're all at the Shiva." Which reminds me of this one. Grandpa Joe, and this is better known, Grandpa Joe is on his deathbed, and as the family gathers around to say goodbye, he suddenly perks up, his eyes open wide. He says, "What's that I smell?" And one of the grandchildren says, "It's Booby's apple cake, your favorite." And he smiles and says, "Like I didn't know." "Listen," he says to the youngest grandchild, "go downstairs and ask Booby for a slice and bring it up to me." The girl disappears and comes back a minute or two later. "Sorry, Grandpa," she says, "it's for the Shiva."
Yeah.
In a more subtle version, the joke ends with the girl saying, "Grandma says it's for later." But which brings to mind a much older joke in much worse taste, but a real joke from a real time. In a small village in the Ukraine, as that country used to be known, a terrifying rumor was spreading. A Christian girl had been found murdered. Fearing the inevitable, an undeserved and bloody retaliation, the Jewish community gathered to plan whatever defensive actions might be possible. Just as the meeting was being called to order, in ran one of the members, out of breath and all excited. "My friends," he cried out, "I have wonderful news. The murdered girl was Jewish." Not all humor is funny, you know. More dark humor, which seems appropriate these days. As his wife lay on her deathbed, she said to her husband, "Honey, I have one last request. I want you to promise that at my funeral, you'll ride in the same car as my mother." "Oh, all right," said her husband, "but I'll tell you, it's going to ruin my whole day." Here's a joke I've heard only once, I've never told before. Two older men are sitting near each other on a park bench on the Upper West Side when they realized they used to be friends many years ago. So they start catching up. "Abe," says Max, "I guess by now your parents are gone." "Oh yes," says Abe, "they died long ago." "How are your brothers?" "Well, one died of cancer 10 years ago, the other of a heart attack." "How's your wife?" "I lost her 6 years ago." "And your wife?" "She died a while back, a stroke." "But your kids, how are your kids?" "You'll laugh," says Max, "but they're dead too." And speaking of dark humor, a subject I seem unable to leave despite the groans all around me. When I first started examining Jewish humor, I was surprised to learn that there were jokes even from the Holocaust period. And in fact, there are books about this. I've read 2 or 3 of them, but I don't feel right telling those jokes. And this one from just before the Holocaust, from maybe, I don't know, 1933, let's say, will do. Long before we knew what was really going to happen, Hitler was taken on a tour of a mental hospital. He encountered one of the patients who seemed entirely indifferent to him. And he said, "Do you know who I am?" "I have no idea," said the patient. "I am the Führer," screamed Hitler. "I'm the ruler of all Germany, and tomorrow I shall rule the entire world." The patient nodded and said with a smile, "Yes, that's how it started with me as well." Another one from the same period. 2 Jews came up with a plan to assassinate Hitler. They learned that he was driven by a certain corner at noon every day, and they waited for him with their guns hidden. At exactly noon, they were ready, but no sign of Hitler. 5 minutes later, nothing. Another 5 minutes, nothing. At 12:15, one turns to the other and says, "Oi, I hope nothing's happened to him." Jewish jokes about Hitler seem, in retrospect, almost perversely mild, probably because they couldn't possibly compete with the true feelings Jews held toward him. And the early jokes come from a period where not even the greatest pessimist could possibly imagine what was to come by the end of the decade. There are countless jokes about anti-Semitism, unfortunately, for good reason. And that topic is yet again on our minds. Here's one from the mid-20th century, updated for a modern audience. On a Delta flight from Atlanta, a middle-aged, well-dressed woman finds herself seated next to a bearded man wearing a kippah. She immediately presses the button to call the flight attendant. "How can I help you?" says the attendant. "I need a different seat," says the woman. "I'm sitting next to a Jew and I find that disgusting. Find me another seat." Please calm down," says the attendant. "Our flight is very full. Let me have a look in first class in case we have something there." A couple of minutes later, the flight attendant returns and says, "We do have a seat available in first class. And I got special permission from the captain, who thought it was outrageous that a passenger should have to be seated next to such a person. So, Mr. Epstein, if you'd like to get your things, I have a seat in first class ready for you." "Wait a minute," says the woman. Obviously, the captain had made a mistake. "I don't think so," said the flight attendant. "Captain Greenberg never makes mistakes." And here's one I just found about a contemporary form of anti-Semitism. A man is walking in Paris. He sees a pit bull attacking a small child. Without even thinking, he rushes in, kills the dog, and saves the life of the child. Several people witness this incident, and soon a couple of reporters have arrived. "What's your name?" They say. "All of Paris will love you. Tomorrow's headline will be Parisian hero saves girl from vicious dog." The man says, "Well, but I'm not from Paris." He says, "That's okay. The whole of France will love you." And the headline will read, "French hero saves girl from vicious dog." The man says, "I'm not from Paris." The reporters say, "Okay, look, you must be from Europe. All of Europe will love you." The man says, "I'm not from Europe either. So where are you from?" He says, "I'm from Israel." Pause. "Well, then tomorrow's headline will read, Israeli man kills little girl's dog." I'm going to wrap up with 4 or 5 jokes that don't fit any particular category, except that I love them. Ruth, a prim and proper widow in her mid-70s, is introduced to Mort, also widowed, and a couple of years older. After a brief and chaste courtship, they decide to marry. On the first night of their honeymoon, Ruth explains that she and her former husband had sex only occasionally, at most once a month, and she hopes her new husband will understand. He seems to agree, but a week or 2 later, he implores her to make love. But what about our agreement? Honey, this is a special occasion, he says. Exactly 3 years ago, my nephew got smicha, he became a rabbi, from Lakewood Yeshiva. I'm so proud of him, I have to celebrate this great event. And Ruth goes along, and to tell the truth, she seems to enjoy it. A few days later, Mort again is acting romantic, and again she reminds him of the agreement. She says, I know, but 6 years ago today, my niece graduated from medical school, and I'd like to celebrate that achievement. Again, Ruth agrees, and again, no complaints. A week later, Mort explains it's his daughter's wedding anniversary. There's again something to celebrate here too. She's perfectly happy. When they return from the honeymoon, Ruth is at the supermarket when she runs into one of her friends. "Nu, how is married life?" says the friend. "That husband of yours is a real live wire, isn't he?" "He's okay," she says, "but from his family, I get so much nachas." Another marriage joke. Levinson is telling his friend about an argument he was having with his wife. "We're sitting at dinner," he explains, and suddenly she says, "Norman, you haven't been listening to a word I've said, have you?" "And I'm thinking," says Norman, "now that's a strange way to start a conversation." My friend Jeff is an expert on jokes about talking animals and their relationship to Jews. Horowitz buys a dog, trains him, and invites his friend over to see the dog. As soon as the friend enters the house, Horowitz points to a newspaper on the floor and says to the dog, "Fetch." The dog climbs up on the couch, ignores the newspaper, wags his tail, and he starts to frown, and he looks up at Horowitz and says, "Let me tell you, you think it's easy being a dog, wagging my tail all the time, acting friendly to get your attention, and eating that dreck you feed me, and walking me twice a day? You think that's enough? And would it kill you to introduce me maybe to a lady dog so a guy could have some fun?" The friend is stunned, the visitor. He's never seen anything like it. When he finally gets his voice back, he says, "This is unbelievable, amazing. Your dog could talk. You told him to fetch the newspaper, and here he is, talking to us like a regular person." "I know," says Horowitz. "He's not fully trained yet. He thought I said kvetch." Another dog joke. An observant Jew, recently widowed, decides to get a dog for companionship. In a pet store, he sees a nice-looking poodle that is 10 times the price of all the other dogs. "What's the story with this guy?" he says to the salesman. "You mean, why is he so expensive?" "This dog can talk." "I would love a talking dog," says the widower. "But what if I bring him home and he won't talk? Can I return him?" "Yes," says the salesman. "I'll put it in writing. You can bring him back for a full refund within 30 days, but that's not going to happen." In the privacy of his home, the man starts talking to the dog, and the dog answers. He really can talk. And when the dog watches the man go through his morning prayers, he learns how to daven too. The dog, in fact, has a real talent for Hebrew and for davening, and also a very nice voice. So over the summer, the man teaches him the Musaf service for both Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. He somehow, and I don't know how this happened, he somehow gets permission to bring the dog to shul for the high holidays. And on the morning of Rosh Hashanah, he sees some of his friends on the way in, and he tells them this dog can daven Musaf. Now, some of these guys are gamblers, and they bet their friend a fair amount of money that the dog cannot possibly lead the Musaf service. When the time comes, the man puts a little talus on the dog, gives him a makser, that's the high holiday prayer book, you remember, and sends him up to the bima. And what happens? Nothing. Nothing. The dog is silent. The owner orders him and then begs him to start the service. Nothing. Finally, angry and humiliated, the man brings the dog home. You're finished, he tells the pet. I'm taking you to the pound, and you know what happens to unwanted dogs at the pound, don't you? Why, says the dog. I thought we were friends. Are you kidding, said the man. I lost thousands of dollars when you went up there and didn't say a single word. Oh, that, says the dog. That was deliberate. Deliberate, says the man. That was humiliating. Why on earth would you embarrass me like that? Hold on, said the dog. Hold on. Think of the odds we'll get on Yom Kippur. I don't have time to include a bunch of doctor jokes, but we'll get this one in. Epstein, a true optimist, goes to the proctologist because he's convinced that something painful is stuck up his butt. The doctor examines him, can't find anything. You sure, says Epstein. I know there's something there. I could probe deeper, says the doctor, but I don't want to hurt you. You should continue, says Epstein. I can handle it. After a moment or two, the doctor says, wait a minute. You're right. There's a reason your butt was hurting. Why? What did you find? You won't believe this, says the doctor, but I just pulled out a dozen long-stemmed roses. You have any idea how they got there? Keep looking, says Epstein. There must be a card. Thank you, Jeff. Two more jokes, and then I'll turn it back to Suzanne. I'll begin with a shorter one, and I found this in a wonderful place, if I can find it. It's on my desk somewhere. It's Moment, a real friend of Jewish humor, did a special jokes issue not long ago. And this joke that I'm going to tell, I found here with the commentary. Again, Suzanne will tell you how to get that issue, I'm sure. It's full of good jokes. Most of them I knew, of course, but that's my field. This was new, and each joke has its own commentary. I contributed the joke about some say yes, some say no. And a man named Michael Krasny, who also has written a book on Jewish humor, contributed this one, which I think is nice and optimistic, unlike some of the jokes I've been telling. A young Jewish father is pushing a stroller when a passerby stops to admire this handsome baby. What's his name? His name is Shlomo, says his father. Say that again, Shlomo. What kind of name is that, says the neighbor. It's Hebrew, says his father. He's named after his grandfather, whose name was Scott. And Michael Krasny says, he writes, I've always loved this joke because it has within it the ongoing sense of assimilation, turned not only to a traditional honoring of the dead, but to the seeds of survival of Yiddishkeit unto the next generation. And finally, a really obscure joke that I found a few years ago on the internet, which is surprising given the visual nature of the punchline. Now, I ended with this joke last time, and a few people found it offensive. And while that in part encourages me, I've changed the word that they objected to, and it's still a good joke, I think. But you have to watch because there's a hand signal a couple of times in the joke. Back in the frontier days, a Jewish peddler has to travel from San Francisco to Omaha, but the ticket for the stagecoach is $5, and he only has $2. Well, you could still travel with us, the driver says, but you'll have to ride shotgun. What? You need a shotgun? No, shotgun. I'll give you a rifle, and if you see a bandit chasing us, you shoot him. Shoot him? I never shot anyone. Well, it's not hard. You point the gun and you pull the trigger. The traveler shrugs and climbs aboard. What choice does he have? A couple of hours later, the driver says, do you see any bandits? He says, I think I see one. He says, how far away? He says, I don't know. How would I know? And the driver says, well, how big does he look? And the peddler says, he looks this big. Should I shoot him? No, he's far too remote. Wait till he's closer. A couple of hours later, do you still see the bandit? Yes, he says, now he's this big. Now he's this big. Should I shoot him? No, he's far too far away. This goes on for hours. Each time the driver tells him to wait. On the third day, when the driver says, how big is he now? The peddler On the third day, I can't even do it. I have to move back. Stretches his arms as far as they will go to show the size of how the bandit is appearing to him. He's that big, says the driver. Okay, now shoot him. No, I can't shoot him. Why not? Are you kidding, says the peddler. I knew him since he was this big. And that, my friends, is the end of today's jokes. Back to you, Suzanne. I hope you had a good time. I did.
Well, Bill, thank you so much. I know everyone very much enjoyed that. We appreciate you taking the time today to give us some laughs. I encourage everybody who has not had a chance to vote this evening to go do that. I wanted to let everybody know that I put links in the chat for Bill's book, The Big Book of Jewish Humor, which you can find on Amazon as well as your local bookstore. I've also put a link for Have I Got a Cartoon for You, as well as What is Your Favorite Joke and Why, which you can find on Moment's website. I encourage everybody to go to momentmag.com, where not only can you subscribe to our magazine and find links to all of this, as well as Bill's previous session with us a few years ago. You can sign up for next week's program on the post-election conversation. Also, please think about attending our gala, which will be held on November 20th. And I wanted to let you know that Michael Krasny, who Bill just talked about, will be doing a class on Jewish literature in January, and we will have that available for you to register soon as well. Again, Bill, thank you so much. Thank you to our laughers, and we hope everybody had a good time today, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.